There we go. Okay. All right. We're good.
Okay. Tina, am I starting the first?
Like, sure.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Our peer advisors who thought this would be a great thing to just have an info session around the senior thesis. Full transparent. So I'm Amy Arginal. I'm an assistant teaching professor in sociology. And this quarter I'm serving as the interim chair of the Graduate Education Committee, the UEC. And so Rebecca London has done a lot of this work, pulled a lot of these slides together. We just made a little bit of revision and updates. But it's a chance for all of you that have expressed interest already around the thesis or thinking about it to ground yourself in what that process will look like, but also get to know each other, because it'll be really great to have a community to do it with. Even if you have different faculty advisors, knowing that you have people that are going through that process. I've advised one person this year, but Val, who is also with us, and Tina will have a lot more wealth of knowledge than I will, but, I can kind of share the overviews of a senior thesis and why you think about doing it, the benefits. And then Valentina will walk us through some of the real stuff that you need to know.
Yeah. Well, I'll just quickly introduce myself too. I'm Tina. I'm your undergraduate advisor, program coordinator. Turn it over to Val.
Yeah, hi. I'm so sorry I can't be in person. I graduated from UCSC last year, and so now I'm living in LA and back home. But yeah, it's really nice to be here and to meet you all via what's it called, the D10, and try to be as helpful as I can be.
All right, so all right, here we go. Okay, so well, first I just want to kind of back up from the senior thesis and just mention that what we're talking about here is the comprehensive senior exit requirement in the sociology BA and the sociology BA with Geis's concentration. So whichever major you're doing. And we do have 3 different options for the comprehensive requirement. And recently I sent out the senior seminar information for fall quarter and the application. And so that's available. The senior seminar is somewhat like a little elective, but more advanced. It's maybe more advanced reading or more advanced writing or research, whatever the professor wants to do in that particular quarter. So you always have the senior seminar option as a backup. Some students, a handful of students, also go the graduate course route, where basically a professor either approves you or invites you to take a graduate level course with them. But what we're really going to focus on today, of course, is the senior thesis option. So before we get too far into it, I do want to mention that there are prerequisites, ideally, that students do before taking on a senior thesis. The most important one is the Soc 3A evaluation of evidence. Or equivalent. Some students may have taken it at their community college, or there's a few on campus we accept. For example, there's a psychology upper division research methods that we accept as well. But in some way, we want you to have done research methods before taking on this big research project. And then ideally, if you also have done classical and contemporary theory, 105A and 105B, though that doesn't always play into the thesis, or sometimes your faculty advisor doesn't necessarily care, but it's a good background to have before your thesis. And then occasionally we see faculty who may want you to have taken something else as well, like I've seen statistics be an important one, especially if you're going to use quantitative methods in your thesis. So there could be other discussions you have with your faculty, but usually 3A is the one that most faculty want to ensure that you've completed. All right, and I'll turn it over to Amy.
Yes, and then I'll just say something about 3A. A lot of faculty will have like 3AB, a proposal paper where you think through a research project. And so even if you want to change maybe the topic, going back to that paper can be a really great starting point to think about well, what would this look like? right? Because that class, you're proposing something of what would be a major research project, which could be a senior thesis. So what is it? It is an undergrad version of a master's thesis or a doctorate dissertation. It's embarking in a research project. So it's a much larger paper than just a typical final paper that would be research. And you really think about research design. So you implement the questions, you think about how you want to answer those questions, you go through and design how you're going to answer those questions, you get data, and then you analyze it and come up with some things. So I like to think of it as like a social phenomenon, something that speaks to you. And I think Val will talk a lot about like thinking about the process. But it's questions. It's not something that you may know, but it could be something that you assume. Right? You're like, I'm wondering why this phenomenon is happening. I have some assumptions, but let me think about some questions that I would like to answer around this. It's 30 pages because you will have a literature review section, which means you're like looking over the scholarship. You'll create like a problem statement. So you'll introduce the issue, design how you answer those questions, and then come up with like, what did you learn as you went through this process? And then 3/4 is typical. I think some people can do it in 2, but if you want to do anything where you're working with people, like doing interviews or focus groups, you have to go through an IRB process, and that can take time. So you really want to be thinking about it as soon as possible. And even 3/4 will feel short when you're in the middle of it. I think we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, cool. It's there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Why? Thank you. Sorry, Tina. So why would you do this? Well, one, if you're interested in research at all, it's a great way to think about that process. Think about what the actual journey of doing a research project looks like where you have ownership, right? So a lot of you might work with faculty, sitting with me right now, but that's not something that you might have ownership over. This is your own project, so you'll have ownership over that. Anybody that's thinking of grad school, this is a really, really great thing to have on your CV. And some graduate programs ask for writing samples. And so you could literally submit the part of you could submit your whole thesis, but you could even just submit like pieces of it that have your analysis or your literature review piece. So having that writing to submit for graduate school applications looks great. It also, I think, even if you're thinking about graduate school, going through this process will help you brainstorm things that you may want to continue to research, right? Because you'll realize, as you're drafting a question, how hard it is to answer questions in a year. And so you're like, okay, we have to bring it really down to a narrow question, but then those other lingering questions you could push and develop a proposal for like a research agenda for graduate school. I'm going to say about this idea of using your degree for something that's meaningful for you as well. So there, that personal piece. The praxis. I'm a big praxis person. So we have a lot of theory. What does that theory really look like in our day-to-day lives? Research is a great way to figure that out and to try to apply it and understand the social phenomenon. I believe deeply that you'll get to build more positive relationships with the faculty that you work with. I'm working with a student now, and we've had lovely conversations throughout the year about their research, but then also I get to learn more about their desires and what they're going to do and kind of walk on that journey with students. So on the other side, from the student side, you get to share your interest and your process with a faculty member. And it will be a challenge. And I think Val will talk about that. But it's a good challenge, right? If digging into kind of social phenomenons, thinking about social change, thinking about some of the structures that we learn about in our theories classes. And you want to go deep into that and think about, like, well, what are some answers I have around these questions? I think this is a great way to go. No. Yeah, so it is a lot of work. But I like to think of it as like, think of all the small papers that you've written, like 10-page research papers. You're really just combining 3 at the end, like, so 3 chunks, 1 for each quarter. You've set up the project, kind of, do some background in research, envision what you want to do, build your literature review, and then you dig into what that could be. So it's a lot of work, but it's doable. And if you have a topic that you're really passionate about, I think you can push through in a year. Let's see. You can apply for a number of awards and scholarships that could help into graduate school, correct, Tina? Like, a lot of those scholarships and awards can be applied to graduate tuition, or you can even get those awards when you graduate.
Yep, and we'll talk more about those a little bit.
Okay, great. And yes, you will learn a lot. But the exciting thing is that there's, some of you in this room, you'll learn a lot on your own. But then if we could build a cohort style, you could also learn a lot from each other. And like share processes, and having that experience, I think could be really exciting. I think doing it alone could be hard. So I'm excited to see the possibilities of like cohorts where we could do check-ins and things. Okay, so am I doing this one? I'm doing this one, right?
Yep.
Thank you. So my advice is to go back to that 3A paper, if you took it here, and think about because as I understand, you could choose any topic that you wanted to, right? Yeah, so you can go back to that, and I would reread it and think about, oh, was this what I was thinking? Has it changed? Has it shifted? And then also spend some time, just like give yourself like an hour or 2 to go down a rabbit hole. That's what I think is, just like, think of your topic, spend an hour or 2 and go down a rabbit hole and see what's already out there. Right. And if you're bored or like not inspired or feeling really, then maybe the topic is something you might want to slightly shift. But really, if you find yourself that like you could go on and on and on, a senior thesis is the way to go. Like, I will get into things like maybe building a presentation or something and find myself like, oh, going deeper and deeper and deeper, then you're on the right track. Right? Like, you're onto something and you're excited to learn, and you're like finding, oh, let me do this search, or let me find this article. That's really a great way to test, is give yourself an hour, with that initial kind of Google search. A paper that you wrote for a class that you thought, oh, there's so much that I could write and I have to narrow it down. That's another great place to go to. And then also things that you're seeing right now that you're wishing you had more time to explore, right? So things that are kind of like sitting in the back of your head and like, I really want more time. Those are all great areas. I like to just write them all down and start to brainstorm. And then the one that's, at the top, do that Google search and see how that feels. And then you can see some of those topics there. And then how do you switch from like, oh, I am interested in, and Russ and I know, like, we've talked about like immigrant rights, or maybe education for immigrant youth. I think you've also mentioned around education and discrimination in education. So some of these things, then think, okay, well, what's the question that I have about this? Like, so that's an overarching topic, but what do I want to know in particular about this? What are the structures in place? How are teachers navigating something? And it does have to be a question that you can answer. It can be nuanced answers. You don't want yes, no. You want kind of complex and, really thick descriptions, types of answers, but you definitely want something that's possible to answer versus like, why is there violence in the world? I mean, yes, we could answer that, but in a senior thesis, that would be really, really hard to think about, like, who do I ask this and how do I pull this together? But something like, why has there been violence on UC campuses around student protest in 2024, right? Like, and then you have details where you could go. Okay. And, oh, yeah, Tina, I think this is you.
Cover this, but I can start off with this. So when you're thinking about your thesis topic, you also want to think about a faculty advisor who could advise you on this. So like Amy is working with a student this year and she's eligible as a faculty member. And I might ask Valerie if you would be able to put the link in the chat in case there's anybody in the chat as well. So on our website, we do have a list of our faculty members, and I can just switch gears really quick for you all and show you. Okay, can you all see this list of faculty?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So basically we are looking for a faculty advisor in our department that is in this list minus a few of them. The ones that we can't do, so there's a few community studies professors on here, like Professor Allison Alcon and Julie Gethman, they're from community studies, or Catherine Mitchell is the Dean of Social Sciences, but everyone else is a faculty member in our department. And this is the list of who is eligible to sponsor your senior thesis. They are the ones who are able to, you enroll in their independent study, they're able to mentor you. Occasionally, we do see students have multiple faculty advisors. You might have one primary and then you consult with others, and that's totally okay. Or maybe you have a sociology faculty advisor as your primary advisor on your independent studies, and then maybe you consult with even a faculty member or lecturer outside of the sociology department. That happens often, but you have to have one faculty from our department as your main faculty advisor. Back over here. So when you are deciding on who your faculty advisor might be, you might look back on what courses have you taken? Whose office hours have you been to? Who did you have great conversations and your lectures, and whose research topics relate to the thesis that you're going to be working on? And that's a key point there, is the professor that you choose has to be able to advise you on this topic. And so you really want to make sure you're matching up that way as well. And you still have chances to take more classes with our professors in the coming year. So maybe you choose a topic, and then whoever your faculty advisor is, there might be other courses that you can take that relate to your project. So you can continue to seek faculty mentors, even if you've already had one professor as your primary. There are others that you can consult with as well. And you're always welcome to take a look at what we are offering next year if you kind of want to consider, like, maybe my topic will be around the environment, and so I want to take a course with Lindsay Dillon, for example. So there are ways to still reach out to faculty as well. And yeah, Amy, is there anything you want to add to that?
No. Oh, I was going to say it is important to reach out early, and maybe you'll talk about that, Tina, about reaching out early, because they might be, like, as their year comes, this is a good time to reach out and check in with folks. And then also, I think Madhvi is joining the department as well. So there'll be one other faculty member that will be doing feminist work next year.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yes, Madhavi Murti will be joining us. She's coming from the Feminist Studies Department. That'd be another person that'll be added to the list. And then, like you're saying, in terms of timeline, I have seen some professors at a certain point say, I have the students I can work with next year. That might be 2 or 3 students, and it could be less, it could be more. But it is a lot of work to be a mentor on a thesis. And so there's a certain number of students that each faculty is willing to take on. So the sooner you can have that conversation with them, the better. And that is why we generally do this in spring, so that they know what they're doing next year. A lot of times if you kind of start late and it's already fall quarter, they might already have their plan set for the whole year and just can't take on any more students. So yeah, timeline is important.
And we'll be balancing that with grad students as well. So sometimes that's why reaching out early is good.
Mhm. This is back to you.
Yeah, so this, again, I think if you took that 3A course, hi, welcome. Some of this, right, like you would have done a piece of this. So this is the proposal that you'll submit. And again, a lot of it can be taken from that class if it's still in line with your topic, even if it's not identical, it could be in line with your topic. And so it's what is your title? Your title will change. So in this case, just really try to give an overarching umbrella of what you're trying to do, because that will shift. You know, people will usually then change their title based on some of the data and the analysis that they give and put something fancy. Don't worry about that, right? You don't want to spend a lot of time on the title, really the description. And a piece of advice, voice memo yourself. Sometimes descriptions are really hard. If you voice memo to yourself, like talk through your idea, that's a great thing to then put into words on a piece of paper. But oftentimes it's easier to kind of like chat with a friend around, oh, this is what I'm thinking I'd like to do. If you have that conversation, do a voice recording, and then it's so much easier than put that into words. And then again, going back to those research questions, the methodology piece is an idea. This will be something that you'll really work out with your faculty advisor. But you know, is it something where you want to do data collection with people? That's the most important thing. Do you want to do like surveys or interviews, or are you going to be doing something called discourse analysis where you're really culling a bunch of maybe speeches, or some people have done song lyrics and pulled that together? If you're doing something that doesn't involve interviews or focus groups, your timeline can look different. But anything with other people, you have to do an IRB. And that's where the timeline can really elongate, I think is the word, right? It can, because an IRB process can take time. And so having that, at least in your methodology, like I know I want to conduct dialogues with people or focus groups, or knowing that is going to be important to have in there. The brief bibliography, you know, between 5 to 10 sources. You don't have to have like read them all and gone deep in depth, but that you're starting to look at, oh, I know what kind of research is out there. And I think that, you know, this is something that will be useful scholarship. The keywords, those are always the hardest thing for me to put into something, but it's like education, access, I'm thinking of like theater, popular, like what is theater of the oppressed, or, you know, like you could have key terms in there because that helps. It will also help as you're thinking of the faculty person, right? Because you can look on their page and see if your keywords might align. Yeah, and then if you did do your 3A paper on the topic that's aligned with what you want to do, submitting that would be great, because that's a really great start. And then the IRB plan, which is going to be, do you need to have permission to do research or not? And if you do, then getting that IRB, because that has to go through the university. It's not something that's just done with your faculty advisor. There's a review board that will come back and say, yes, this research looks ethical. You're not going to harm anybody. Or they'll come back oftentimes and ask questions like, how are you going to protect the names of perhaps people who are undocumented or children? Or there's all sorts of different types of protections that are there. Yeah.
I had a question. Sorry, I came in late. So it talks about like the advisor. Do they specifically, or the faculty that's helping you with this, do they specifically have to be sociology department? Okay.
Yes, you can have somebody that would be willing to support on the side, but to sign off, it has to be a social person.
Okay.
If you have a faculty that's willing to work with you, you can talk to Tina or myself, and we can figure out, because like maybe then you have a social faculty that's willing to kind of oversee, knowing that some of that work might be split.
Okay.
Yeah. Tina, would you add anything on that?
Yeah, I'll add, and we will share these slides, so you'll have this too, but there is a set of eligible faculty that you can select from, but you're welcome to have any other consulting professors that you want, but there has to be one primary sociology faculty that's full faculty, not lecturer or graduate student or TAs. And I'll also add just kind of continuing on from the proposal. So the timeline of talking to your professor and doing a proposal can sometimes be in the reverse. I sometimes see students where they have an idea and they don't necessarily write a proposal first, but they want to talk their idea out with a professor. You know, is my research question doable in 3/4? Is it specific enough? Is this something that we can, you know, IRB would approve of? And so sometimes if you want to just start a conversation with a faculty member before you dive into a proposal, that makes sense. But I've also seen the reverse, where especially if you've done Soc 3A, you have a proposal, it's the same topic you want to keep going on, or maybe you have another paper you've done and it practically is a proposal already. Sometimes I see students come in with a proposal ready and then they go and talk to their faculty member and show like, this is the work I've already done. This is my idea. What do you think? So in terms of which comes first, it can be either one. I will say though that a thesis can't happen without a faculty. So securing that faculty this quarter is very important. So don't delay too long and spend too long on a proposal unless you have a faculty in mind as well, that you're going to talk to and get approval from.
And I think having the description of the work, again, it can be rough. And the research questions are the two most important things to have as you go to meet a faculty. So at least you can say, this is what I'm thinking about. So having spent some time thinking about that prior to is going to be really important. But the rest can definitely be done in collaboration or, you know, with consultation.
Mhm.
Okay, I think we're switching gears to Valerie now.
Hi again. I'm Valerie. You can call me Valerie or Val. And so I graduated last year in June, and I was a thesis student last year. And so my project looked into UCSC's Hispanic Serving Institution designation and how that could be potentially a foundation for more Latinx solidarity across campus, and how, you know, this Latinx students navigated UCSC and just their overall sense of belonging and figuring out higher education for themselves and things like that. And so I think it was really important to share that at least for me, I always thought that anything that had to do with academia, it felt very formula-like, in the sense where it's like question, data, findings, right? And then you're kind of done. And so that to me didn't really sit well when I was trying to figure out whether or not I wanted to do a thesis in that way. And so I wanted to share that a thesis doesn't necessarily just have to be extractive, right? It's not like you're just like, okay, I'm going to do this, figure it out, and I'm just doing it to exit, right? Like you can incorporate ways that like engages research in different avenues. And some of that can be advocacy work, some of that can be working with campus in a different way, right? Like a part of my project was incorporating art. And so I don't know if anyone's seen a mural on Science Hill by the library, that's kind of big. And like that was my way of kind of making research work for me. And I just wanted to highlight that too, because I know that at least for in my perspective, I felt that research could feel a little bit like it's something's missing. And to me, that was that piece. It was that advocacy piece. And so there's other ways to engage with research. And that's why a thesis is so cool, because you kind of get to take the wheel in how you engage with research that perhaps classes don't really give you. And so there's advocacy that can happen, like a different way to engage with campus, you know, a way to engage with communities that maybe you've been wanting to work with that perhaps you haven't had the opportunity to do in classes. And then like Professor Arginal mentioned too earlier, it produces a very personal writing sample. And I don't necessarily mean personal in the sense where you write about yourself. Like it could definitely be anecdotal and autoethnographical, but it's more of like, you know, I applied to graduate schools this past year, and I felt more confident in my application because I was submitting a writing sample that was mine completely. And it also made me just feel a little more confident in myself that I wanted to go to graduate school and this is something I want to pursue. And I think a thesis is a great avenue to explore that for yourself as a person. And sometimes it could end up resulting that you don't want to go to graduate school and you don't want to do research, and that's also okay. Um, so I just wanted to share that because that was a concern that I had when I was thinking about thesis stuff. I also wanted to share that it can also be funded. So my project was qualitative. So I conducted 30 interviews. But I wanted to make sure because, we're students, we're broke. I know it takes a lot to take time out of your day to speak with someone. And so I told myself, like, you know what, I want to make sure that I'm not necessarily just like, taking someone's time and not giving something back to them. And so I wanted to have gift card availability for people, right? And so I had to seek out that funding to secure that for my for the people who would participate in interviews with me. And so these are some of the scholarship stuff that I applied to that gave me that possibility. And so there's the Correct Scholarship and the Humanities Institute. I believe the Humanities Institute's the undergraduate research fellowship, something along those lines. Both of those scholarships do have requirements to produce a poster. At the end, also, I wanted to share that because I know that can feel very daunting when you see that as a requirement, but it's honestly not that bad because it's just your paper, but on a visual is essentially what it is. And the good thing about these two, like more student fellowship kind of atmospheres and vibes is that it doesn't have to be perfect. Like my Humanities Institute poster was really bad because they required it earlier than my findings were done. And so I was like, I'm sharing a lot of preliminary stuff that's not done. And they were like, that's okay. We just want to know what you've been doing. And so it's not necessarily this like, oh, I have to produce this poster that has to be, mind blowing and super like finalized when no, they required it before my paper was even done. And so I just wanted to share that too, in case that poster can feel a little intimidating. There's also Pathways to Research mini grants. Pathways to Research is a program for research that students can participate in if they are EOP eligible. But it's only for people in that program. And so if you are thinking about research and maybe you're even considering grad school, this is a great program that matches you with a graduate student mentor who can help you navigate that in addition to your faculty advisor. And so they also have the ability to have mini grants available for students in that program for their projects. There's also department funding. I didn't use this option. My faculty advisor, Professor Rebecca London, told me about it a little bit too late in the game. But there is some funding in the department that is available. But also by that point when I reached it, I didn't need it anymore. And so I left it for any other student who potentially needed it because I was able to secure funding in other sources. But that funding is also available in the department too. And then there's also college-based grants. And so I was a Merrill affiliate. I know Merrill's grants that is available for students who are engaging with projects is called the Merrill Student Special Project Fund. I think it's something along that long title. There's also equivalent at Oaks. I think Oaks was called the Oaks Student Project Fund. There should be equivalents for all of the college I said campuses, but colleges, you know what I mean? It's been a while since I've spoken the Santa Cruz language, and so my brain is a little, it feels a little weird. But essentially, whatever college you're affiliated with should have a fund specific for students of that college who are engaging with thesis work. And you can apply to that and secure funding that way too. All of these do have deadlines, and it's best to always apply earlier on, just so you know if you need to continue to apply for funding. Because if you end up securing enough funding that you need, then you save yourself, time and effort for not having to continue furthering funding applications. And especially for the college-based grants, I can only really speak for Merrill. Merrill's was really weird where they did it by quarter. And so if you needed I needed funding by spring, I need to at least apply no later than winter quarter to know and have the funding available already by spring. And so you also want to be prepared and think strategically like that to make sure that the funding you need, you have access to when you need it. And so it's always best to apply earlier on than waiting. Funding is also really good for folks who need access to certain types of software. And so for example, there's someone in my cohort who was doing quantitative work who needed access to, Qualtrics and other quantitative software that I didn't necessarily need, but they needed subscriptions for. And that funding can help pay for that to help their project go a little more smoother. Funding can also help you with incentives, also with like getting things printed. Like if you're doing recruitment with flyers, that stuff costs money. And so you want to make sure you also have like just a little bit extra to make sure that if there's anything that needs to be printed, you have access to that too. And so here are some of the resources I used. Canva is like it's like a flyer making website that is free. There is a premium one where you pay for the subscription. So if you do want that, again, you want to apply for funding so you can afford that. But there is a free version. And you can use that too. Google Forms is really good because it links to spreadsheets. And so if you're going to have people sign up for things, you want to make sure you have access to who is filling that out. And Google Forms does it in a way where you don't have to do too much of that inputting yourself, and it's just kind of automatic. For folks who are going to work with people, you will need to do that IRB form that Professor Argento mentioned. And in that requirement, you have to set up certain things to get approval. And so one of those things is a consent form to let participants know, this is what you're going to be speaking to me with about. This is your rights as a participant in this project. And do you consent to speaking with me for X amount of time? That consent form that I used, I got from a template off the UCSC IRB like website itself that helped me kind of structure that in a way that looked nice, because I just had opened up my Word and I didn't know how to put it together because I'd never seen a consent form myself. And so the IRB office at Santa Cruz has templates of consent forms, and I just wanted to share that too because I came really in handy for me. And then I can put the link in the chat too. Okay, and then for like sharing about the project, I used Instagram. Not just like not necessarily my own Instagram, but I had spoken to colleges who had Instagram pages and their student councils and asked them to promote the project like that, and then share it with other resource centers and departments via Instagram. I used bus stops. Do keep in mind when it comes to the bus stops, they take the flyers off every Monday, and so you also want to be strategic when you post it. And also because of the environment, like you want to make it sure it aligns with, like, you don't want to over post because then you're just using too much paper and it can, I don't know. I try not to overprint, but that's just like a personal thing, but keep that in mind too. There's also newsletters. I had spoken to resource centers to share my project because my project was specific for Latinx students. I would work with El Centro's interns who would share my flyer on their newsletter that students would receive. I worked with the Cantu Queer Center who would, share the newsletter. Some resource center newsletters do require an application and there's like a time wait. And so again, like with the funding, you want to look into that to make sure that you do it with time so that the flyer is there and ready to be shared when you need it shared. And then there's also department bulletin boards like you see in the sociology hallways. All departments have that, and I did that as well, and with the libraries too. And then I had used the UCSC Digital Library and Google Scholar for the literature review. I also use, so in the articles, you also want to pay attention to the reference pages to see what articles they're citing and to kind of help with that literature review building to see what it is, like who are the people you're engaging with, and you want to make sure you capture all of the rich conversations that are relevant to what you're looking into. And on Google Scholar in particular, when you look, if you find an article that you see is really relevant, it hits all the points you're trying to address. Google Scholar has this really cool thing where, like, on the bottom of like where the article name is, it says cited by. If you click that, you could see all the other research projects and studies that cited that article that you find really relevant to also capture other literature readings that you need to read and incorporate with. Next slide, please.
One thing I'll add is that
Mhm.
department funding, we do have a pot of money that we can tap into, and things that we've used it in the past for, are a lot of times have been refund on things, like if you needed to travel somewhere for your thesis, or maybe you did have a large print project that you had to do and you had to go to Kinko's or whatever it was, and you needed a refund on that, or it could even be like if it's just flyers and you need those done, like really kind of basic ones. You can also ask about using our machines as well. So let me know if that comes up. We're currently working with Amy's student who's going to be attending the student parent conference, and it's because her thesis is on student parents at UCSC, and hopefully we can fund a part of her expenses there. So yeah, those kinds of things. Okay, there we go, Val.
Thanks. I try to be okay. So when I was making my backtrack, I have a really hard time figuring out what to say. It's just like I don't know what to share, and so like part of me is also like I don't want to overload folks because I know that I'm just going. And so I hope this is helpful. And if there's anything in particular that you want to ask me, like I said, like I'm fully transparent and I'm happy to share everything. And so if there's something on the slide that I didn't cover, please let me know and I'm happy to talk about it. But I thought it would be helpful to kind of share about things to keep in mind when you're deciding to do a thesis. I know all the time people talk about time management and it's sometimes it becomes like this thing where it's like, oh, I know how to time manage. I'm totally good at that. Like even when I procrastinate, I figure it out. Like I can handle it. I mean time management more of like there's literally no one watching you. Okay. And this kind of ties into your comfortability working independently. But like at the end of the day, you don't have to ask permission for an extension because essentially you're the person giving yourself a permission for extension, right? It's like, it's like you have to figure out when things need to get done to make sure that you meet the ultimate deadline, which is having your paper done by spring to do your senior exit requirement. But everything else that leads you up to there is all on you. And that's what I want to emphasize when I talk about time management. Because like I am a super timeline deadline person, but I ended up like once things start to pile, it's over. Like I wrote my paper wasn't done and I had 3 weeks left to spring quarter. It's like things happen because like I would like when it comes to time, like it can go all over the place. And so I just want to emphasize how you have to be hard on yourself and strict. Like it's easy to be like, you know what, I'm tired. I'm just gonna work on the literature review next week. Like I'm gonna call it a day. Yeah, you can do that. You can. That's what I did. But it's like, keep that in mind because next, it's next week and you're like, oh, I'll just put it off till the weekend. Oh, I'll work on it on winter quarter or winter break. Oh my gosh, winter break's over. I still haven't done my literature review. That was literally me. Okay. And like, it was all over. So I just want to emphasize that you want to make sure that you can be a little hard on yourself when it comes to things like that. In terms of like whether you think about whether thesis stuff you can manage it and like the requirements that come with it. And then that ties into balancing and prioritizing other responsibilities. So I worked while I did my thesis. So I had to work and I was also part of other programming on top of like my classes and my thesis. And then I was on another research project. And so it can become very overwhelming when you're trying to figure out what needs to get done first. And especially because your thesis stuff, like you have to hit certain marks essentially to make sure that you can write your paper. And so those marks include like the proposal, like collecting the data. If you have to do an IRB form, you have to get that IRB in, right? And so it's like, you want to make sure that when it comes to balance, that the way that I did it is like I had goal points for every quarter to meet so that I essentially had everything I needed by spring to write my paper in spring. Do I recommend that? I don't know. I don't know if that's how you work. I wrote my whole paper in spring and it was a lot. I don't think I would recommend that. I think if I could go back, I would split it and have writing stuff done for every quarter, but I didn't do that. And so that's like the other thing when it comes to responsibility with a thesis project, there's so many moving parts that it's easy to start like focusing on one part of it and then you forget about the writing and the writing eats you because like Professor Arjun, it's like a 30+ paper. Like it's a lot, and you want to make sure that you're able to get the things done that's needed to even start the writing because that has to be done too. And then when it comes to a faculty advisor, like definitely pick someone who's working in the interests that you want, so that they can help you figure out like how to narrow down the topic, but you also want to make sure you vibe with that person, right? Like my faculty advisor and I had known her since my second year. Like I knew I was interested in research. Like I built that relationship with her beforehand. Um, and so if there was ever like, if there's a professor you just genuinely like to talk to, you know, or even want to get to know more, you're kind of like, I think that person's kind of cool. Like I like their research. That's like another way to form a bond and to also build, you know, potential letter of recommendations. And so it's really important to keep that in mind when you're selecting a faculty advisor, to make sure that you see yourself working with this person for a whole year and really wanting to grow and learn from them too. And then lastly, I wanted to say that it's not necessarily a can I, because I think everyone can. Like genuinely, I think everyone can do a thesis. Like I don't believe that there's like, you know, no one can't. It's more of like, do you want to? Like, is this something you see yourself doing? Is this something that you see yourself enjoying? Is this something that you're like, you know what, I want to try to do it. Like, I think I can do it. I'm gonna do it because it sounds really cool. I want to do it because I want to know if research for me. I want to do it because you know what, I'm interested in like K-pop and I want to look into K-pop and there's no classes on K-pop. You know, like things like that, right? Like I think like that's the more important questions to ask yourself when you're deciding. And then I kind of talked about this already, but what I wish I knew before I got started, like I said, I procrastinated a lot in my writing. And so I waited till spring quarter to write my whole paper. Don't recommend that. Definitely write as much, like when you have time to write, whatever you can. Um, Time is very valuable. 3/4 is not enough. I took the whole year and I graduated wishing I had started my thesis in summer. Like you need so much time to get things done, especially if you're thinking about working with people. Um, like if I got so caught up in doing the interviews, I wanted to talk to so many people, and then it real like I hit this wall that was time, where it's like I don't have enough time to interview like more than 30 people because I have to start working on the analysis, right? And so time is really valuable, and you want to make sure that you kind of like cut off the chunks of your day to manage all the stuff that needs to get done. And then that being said, nothing goes according to plan. I nothing went according to my plan. Like I had a timeline, I was supposed to meet it and nothing happened. Like I never hit it. Like something always happened and then I got, you know, things piled up. Something happened to like in my personal life. Like I had a hard, like there was a concept in a class I didn't understand that took up more of my time, right? And so I just say that because if you're someone like me where you like to plan things out and you're like, you know what, I know how to get this done, be aware that nothing goes according to plan, and that's okay. Especially when it comes to research, you know, it just happens. Like everything is so unpredictable. People will flake on you for interviews, right? Like people have to postpone stuff. It's like it just happens. You kind of go with the flow and figure out how to balance everything else because something happened, and that's okay. But I just wanted to mention that I wish someone told me that, because when things weren't going according to plan for me, I'd panic because it's like I'm behind. I'm not gonna complete my exit requirement and I'm gonna like not graduate. Um, and then the other thing too is there's a diversity in projects and experience. And I wish someone had told me that too, because so my advisor had other thesis students working with her. And so because of that, I had a cohort. But even with that cohort, like everyone was working on something different. And so sometimes it's just good to know that, because sometimes a question I had, no one else had. And that's okay because everyone's project is so different. And that's like the beauty of it too, right? Because it's like you're working with people who think differently, who are approaching their questions differently, who perhaps really enjoy statistics for some reason and you don't. And you're like, I can't understand why you chose to do your project on stats, right? And it's like you learn from that too. And in that sense, everyone's growing with their project, even if it's different. And so I wish I knew that too. And then lastly, I'm really excited to hear that it seems like there's like an effort to make a cohort of thesis students, even if they don't have the same advisor, because yes, very few people do it. Like I don't, if had it not been for my advisor having more than me, I wouldn't have had a cohort. And I didn't even know other students who were doing theses outside of my cohort. And it turns out a friend of mine was, and I didn't even know, you know, because it's like so little, like there's very few thesis students where sometimes it can feel isolating if you don't have that. Like she didn't have a cohort I did. I can't imagine going through the thesis project alone, even when it just comes to panicking, because again, nothing goes according to plan. And like you're panicking by yourself. That sounds horrible. I would not wish that upon everyone. Um, so
Bruce.
I think it's really exciting to hear that there's an effort to create cohorts with different advisors, so that you all can support each other and share information, and just really kind of, cheer each other on when it comes to getting the thesis done, because it's a lot and it's very stressful. It's depending on your project too, it can be very emotionally charged.
Mhm.
And you want to make sure you have outlets to share and speak with who are also experiencing that. And so that's super important. And then one last thing that I didn't put on the slide, but your thesis project topic isn't the end all be all, if that makes sense. I had a whole proposal set on working with like a specific social welfare program, and I changed it a week before fall because I realized I wanted to engage with community. And I realized that, you know what, I'm more interested in this. And so I say that also because, like when you're working with research, sometimes it can feel like I have to pick a topic and that's it and it's set. When it's like, no, you can change it if you have time, one. And two, even if you don't have time and you realize like maybe this thesis project isn't the topic I wished it was on, now you know that for the future too. So for grad school, you don't continue working in that topic and things like that. Yeah, I'm sorry I rambled. I hope I didn't go over time, but
You're,
yeah, if there's questions, you can ask me at the end, I guess.
thanks, Val.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the logistics of starting the thesis like officially. So let's say you've done a proposal, you have a faculty advisor. Okay, what do you actually do? How does this look on your plan moving forward in your senior year? So in terms of putting a senior thesis on your schedule, there are independent studies. So enrollment for this is a bit different. We don't list independent studies in the schedule of classes. If you've ever looked at our class offerings, you've never seen a thesis course, you've never seen an independent study. It's because they're kind of behind the scenes. And basically what you're doing is a form. So every quarter there is a form, and I'll have a slide after this that shows you the form. It's the Petition for Undergraduate Individual Studies course. And you're basically filling that out every quarter, and it details what it is that you're doing. You're getting it approved by your faculty member every quarter, indicating that yes, you can start a thesis. Yes, you can continue your thesis every quarter. So there's a faculty signature or at least an email approval needed every quarter to let us know that you're continuing. And then basically you do the form, you get the approval, you give it to me, and I issue you a class number to put on your schedule. And from then on, it's you and the professor working together. You set your timeline with each other. You maybe set once a week for 30 minutes, we're checking in or whatever the class schedule is. But there's no day and time attached. Independent studies are you and the professor doing what it is that you need to do that quarter. Okay. So the form itself, it's on our website, it's on the registrar's website. You can find it several places. You can just Google UCSC independent study and find it. So the form, there's a few parts of it that you'll do. There's, top section, that's your name, your basic information, your title and description of the proposed course. That's your working title. It could change at any time. There's a few kind of weird things on here, like course sponsoring agency. That's us. That's the sociology department. We're sponsoring your independent study. Study site address. That's usually UCSC unless you're physically going somewhere else and, maybe you're working with an organization and that's where your research is at. That's totally fine. Evidence of preparation, for example, your Soc 3A or equivalent, or any Soc class that you've taken that's relevant to your thesis topic. So in general, I'd say don't worry too much about some of the answers to this. It's just in general, give us some information about yourself and your thesis. The parts that are important on this form for each quarter is the description of work to be submitted. Ideally, what you're doing is each time you are working with your faculty member to get approval to continue each quarter with this form, you're kind of talking about like what's expected of me in fall quarter, then in winter, what's expected in winter. By the end, kind of like Val was talking about having a timeline. Ideally, what is your goal for fall, for winter, for spring? And every quarter when you do this form, you want to lay it out. What am I ideally going to be doing by the end? And kind of think of that as your mini syllabus of that particular quarter for the independent study for the thesis. The rest of the form are approvals. So the instructor approval box on the left, it could be their physical signature or their email approval. I'm happy to take their email approval. And then the one on the right is mine. I fill that out once I know that you have approval and I want to get you enrolled in the class. And at the bottom is just your signature. So, okay. So the courses themselves that go on your schedule, again, they're all independent studies. They are SOCH 195A, B, and C. Each are 5-unit classes that go on your schedule. We absolutely need to see 195A and B, a minimum of 2 quarters on your schedules. The C, we generally recommend it, but it's optional in case, for example, you just don't have space in your schedule anymore. Maybe you're doing a double major and it's packed. That's fine. Sometimes we see students working on a thesis even if they can't fit an independent study on their schedule. Occasionally we see students who might have started their thesis in a class, and so they're kind of already ahead and they don't need full 3 quarters. That's fine as long as we have at least 195A and B 2 quarters. Most of the time, like 90% of the time, I do see 195C and 3 quarters happen. And ultimately, though, as I say that, you have to have this discussion with your faculty advisor. Some faculty advisors are more strict on the timeline, and you talk to them about your research question, and they say, no, that is a 3-quarter question, and therefore we need to create a timeline for all 3 quarters. So definitely you want to talk to your faculty about what they think your timeline should be as well. Bonus. So one of your thesis independent study courses also will satisfy one of your upper division electives that we require in our major. So whether you're doing the sociology BA or the sociology BA with the Geises concentration, either major you're doing requires 5 upper division electives. If you are doing a thesis, you basically cross out one of the electives that's needed in the major, and instead you do 4 electives plus your thesis, because we'll, for example, say, well, Soc 195A is part of your thesis and it satisfies an upper division elective in the major. So we're kind of double dipping a class if you're doing a thesis. And we really do that because we know the thesis takes a long time. We know it takes up time on your schedule. And so we kind of want to give you just a bonus to give you more time to work on your thesis. And I can, if you are moving forward with a thesis, I can absolutely help you kind of rearrange your academic plan and make room for your independent studies and incorporate this little bonus as well. Okay. I think we're getting to the end here, and we want to share some resources and references, and all of us can probably talk about this, but the one I really want to show is on our website. We have a senior thesis handbook, and we will share the slide so you'll have the link, but it's definitely accessible on our website. There's a lot of what we talked about is on here, the steps of getting started. There's also what to include in your proposal. Everything we've talked about is there. This one we're going to skip over, but I especially want to highlight that there's a whole timeline there for you as well. And it starts in spring. So that's what we're doing now. And this is just a sample type timeline. You can, of course, adjust it to what you and your faculty agree. But if you need kind of a starter timeline, this goes step by step for you. And the other one I want to point out is there's a whole outline in case you're like, what are each of my chapters? What are each of my sections in my senior thesis? How long might it need to be? Each of these will go over what you need to do. So there's a lot there. Amy or Val, are there other ones we should talk about on here?
I don't think so.
Um,
The IRB, but I mean, we don't need to talk about that, but just know that it's part of that research so that you can start to look over it just to understand that process. Because I think that's probably the most difficult and complicated process outside of actually writing.
Harvard University actually has an excellent guide to writing specifically a sociology thesis as well, and it's pretty extensive. So it's like it's like a thesis all on its own. But it's a really great guide as well. Princeton, so, Princeton has one as well. And the thing I'll also point out is we in our department, we specifically have a senior thesis award. So students who write a senior thesis and it incorporates race, class, and gender, you're eligible to apply for this, where it's due today for students who are writing a thesis this year, or if you, even students like Val who graduated last year, you can apply 1 year after graduating, after you finish your thesis as well. So yeah, we're gonna have a thesis winner hopefully soon, and this year it's 2,500 up to 1 or more students, and I would really encourage you to apply if you do move forward with a thesis. Okay, we had lots of info. Questions?
I have a question. Do you know how many students you are gonna be taking on next year?
That's a great question. I'm not capped as of the moment. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Tina, what, like in terms of Rebecca, I know Rebecca's supported a lot. What do you think her numbers, did she have a number where you thought, wow, that's a high number, or?
I think 2 or 3 is comfortable for her. I think 1 year she might have gone to 4, but she didn't like it. I think 3 is her.
Yeah, I was thinking around 4 because I have that support built into my schedule, but so, yeah. Cool. I'm not there. Yeah, any other questions?
I had a question in terms of like selecting a non-primary faculty. Do they have to have you seen professors take on like a thesis or like student with a thesis that doesn't really have like knowledge of their like subject? Like there's a professor I'm interested in working with that doesn't really study like specifically the area I'm studying, but I'm really interested in like their work with like maybe like the statistical side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, that's my 3. First is area, right? But if it's not area, I think about methodology. So for example, like Rebecca London and myself both do PAR and kind of overarching community engaged research. So even if it's not necessarily the type of research, like in terms of an area, like I do migration and human rights, but I'm a PAR practitioner, so more community engaged. So those are the first 2. The third could be a theoretical frame, right? So you're really interested in looking at, say, Black geographies as kind of a theoretical framing or abolition, then maybe going to like Camilla Hawthorne or Nia Jones that do some of that work. So that, even if maybe like what your focal point will be might not be theirs, but that's a theoretical framing. So those are the 3. And then Val said also, if it's a faculty that you do have a solid relationship with, that helps. But, one of those connections would be ideal because then you have that space that you can get that support.
And we could maybe do more than one primary advisor too, like under sociology.
Val, yeah, you're shaking your head, yes.
Yeah, there's been students in the past who've worked with more than one professor at a time in sociology. Like it's like they're both like co-advisors together. So on like their final paper, it'll have both professor names.
Okay. And then like I supported a student this year who was not a Soc student. So I've been working with a student all year who was doing research, didn't do a senior thesis, but was doing research. And so we checked in and that person took their independent study. So there is ways to get feedback from other people, but you need to have that Soc person be kind of to overview the thesis itself.
On that same note, you can do research without doing a senior thesis, like on your own.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna, because I'm doing research right now with somebody in the psych department, and I'm a social major and community studies major, so it's like nothing, not to say that what I'm researching doesn't have anything to do with those like communities, but that's my question. So I feel like my other questions that I had, do people do senior theses because they want to go to graduate school and they need that like poster presentation slash like thesis?
It helps. It's also on your record, right? So it looks really good for graduate school. But also like Val said, if you have a project that you're working on that you have ownership over, you'll be able to write about that in a grad school application as well. So I think for you may want to sit down maybe with Tina and like brainstorm some possible like what that could look like. Because it seems like the unique situation. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're already doing the research, you know, the senior thesis is just a great way to kind of add that on, you know, your resume and the stuff that you're doing. But of course, if you're doing research like the student that I'm working with has a phenomenal like video that was made, kind of like Val said, there's been some creative things and we had a lot more freedom because there wasn't a senior thesis. But Val, I think, is a great example of being able to make your research really personable and, you know, finding the creative outlet too. And I'm also, Val, the fact that you said you wrote your senior thesis in the spring and did a mural, I on my chair when you said it.
Yeah.
I think that you guys had a slide actually about the why, and I don't think you were here. For that.
Oh yeah, so definitely go back and look at those
Okay.
because that'll help you.
Oh, okay. So like the difference between like doing this versus like doing, what is it, a capstone or a
Senior seminar.
same center?
The senior seminar will definitely be more led by the faculty person. So that's where you have less ownership. You might be able to do your final paper on something that's in line with that theme that you kind of, you know, design, but it'll be more guided by the faculty and what that senior seminar looks like.
I just want to say one thing in terms of resources too. We have physical, like independent study forms right outside of the sociology peer advising office. So you guys can just get that and take it to your faculty.
Yeah.
If you want.
Yeah, great.
On that note as well, whenever the peer advisors have, I'll go all the way that we hear that whenever the peer advisors have drop-in advising hours, there's a whole shelf of senior theses as well, if you ever want to just like stop by and look at them. And also I added it kind of at the bottom here, but I also have digital versions. So if you want to email me after this, because you're curious, like, what have proposals look like? What does a senior thesis look like? I'm happy to share a whole folder with you, and then you can look at what students have done in the past. So feel free to email me and I'll share that with you.
I have a quick question on that topic. Can you use people's previous theses in your literature review?
Ooh, I'm gonna maybe go to Amy, but it sounds like something you would have to cite.
So yeah, so that you cite it, of course. I have a question, Tina, actually, because if those theses
Theses?
are public, yes. So for example, I worked in the master's program at USF, and all of the students' theses, their MA theses, is part of a digital record on the library that's public access. So you can cite that. If these are, then you can cite them.
They're not
Way to
public.
give credit.
These are not public.
Okay, so they're not public.
Right.
You
Public
might
are
want to
also-
get permission by the person first
Yeah.
before citing them. That I would just do that out of kind of like ethical practices of like, hey, I read your senior thesis as an example. I really liked it. Is it okay for me to cite it in my paper? I would just ask if you can.
Tina, I'm also making an appointment with you right now, and it says that appointment starts at like 8 p.m. on a Monday. Is that correct?
Did you make it for today? I do have 8 p.m.
Oh, it's for
appointment.
next
You're right.
Monday. It's for next
You're right.
Monday. I just want to make sure because that's pretty late, and I want to make sure that
8 a.m. It's not 8 a.m. It's 8 p.m. Yep, that's true. Yep.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Tina. I'm learning so much this evening.
Nighttime appointments. So yeah.
Okay, well, I think we'll stop recording.
Okay.
And you'll get a copy of this. So like anything that you missed before you came in, we recorded it.